Okay, today I want to talk about the Cardrona Hotel. This is a piece of research that took way too long to get into print. You can find it online on the Journal of Popular Culture, the Australasian Journal of Popular Culture. Because this is an example of a piece of goldfields heritage that's actually turned into something far bigger. So I'll go through some of this sort of précis some of my my writing, but this was a presentation I gave in 2016 to the Australian Historical Association based on the Cardrona. So I started calling it George and Rebecca's place. You'll see why in a minute, but yeah, let's get into it. So it starts when I first proposed this, it was going to go to an architectural heritage conference to be held in Melbourne at Melbourne University, and so you had to submit what you were going to say in advance for peer review. So they did that, so I did that, and the first thing they said, being Australians, is get rid of all of your native narrative out of this. We're not interested in that. We're only interested in the modern era. And they were quite surprised when I said to them, look, I'm a New Zealander, you don't get rid of the native stuff, and furthermore, if you ask me to, you're not the kind of people I want to associate with. And I promptly pulled the paper out of the conference, which upset them a great deal, because I think they just thought, we'll ask him to delete it, he'll comply, and then we can carry on and ignore the native narrative, because that's Australian. But I didn't, and so this ended up at a different conference. So Cardrona was called the Old Rao, and rao is the blade or the cutting edge of patu or any other weapon. But in this case, it's a very old name, probably back to Waitaha and Rapawai and others who first settled down here. But it was an important place because, for a very simple reason, there's a natural rock bridge. Now, I don't think this shows up well on the video, but there's a natural rock bridge across the Kawara River that was critically important. It became important in the mining era too, but this is whatatorere, or the flying ladder. And so to get to, everyone was heading for Arahura because that's where the Panamu is. So Māori living in Murihiku or Southland basically headed up, crossed this critically dangerous place, this critically dangerous river at Whatatorere, and then went up this valley, which was the Ora. Stopped off, there was a little village at Wanaka, and so they went up the Nevis Valley, down the Nukumai, and so on. So ended up across what later is now known as Haast Pass. I always think the Haast Pass, to get there, you know, they actually followed Māori trails to get to the Haast Pass. You know, they didn't discover anything. But anyway, go up there and get to the Panamu. So Whatatorere, the stone bridge across the Kawara, was the key part to it. It actually ends up still being the key part when we look at the goldfields history. So it gets renamed by, there's a Scottish surveyor, John Turnbull Thompson, and there's quite a lot written about him that's worth checking out. Most of it by his descendant, John Hall Jones. But he named it after, this is the Cardrona House in Scotland. There's still a little village there. I think there's basically a pub and a post office, and that's about it. But this is a sketch he did of himself, looking out. Now, in this case, I think from memory, he's looking at the southern end of Wanaka. So rather than the Orao itself, but he names it Cardrona after that place. And I've got to check my notes so I actually stay on track with this, because I get quite excited about this. Central Otago Gold Rush breaks out August 1862. So you remember that Otago Gold Rush, which is to Gabriel's Gully, April/May, June 61. 62, the gold rush breaks out because you have Horatio Hartley and Christopher Riley turn up with 1,000 ounces of gold, put it on the gold buyer's counter in Dunedin, and basically they ask for a reward because this is a pretty significant area. They get promised by the provincial government £2,000 if you, two things. One, you've got to tell us where you found it, and two, we've got to get gold license revenue and the payment that has to be made on all gold worth £2,000 in the next 6 months. Well, they actually did that in the first 3 weeks, so it was quite a good investment in the end. But it breaks out, and once again, Whatatarere becomes critical, because the first rush is to the Clyde, Cromwell sort of area, this gorge. But then what happens is you get flooding in the Clutha, and as soon as you get flooding, people just fan out. But in here, between Clyde and Cromwell, there's a really nasty gorge. It's tamed now, it's under Lake Dunstan, but at the time, this was a really dangerous way of getting to where you want to go. So they fan out, and people find the hard way, that's not a good way to go. So they're landing and coming across the Manitoto, and they come up and over, and again, an old Māori Paramu route, over past what will later become Bendigo. That's the place I've based all my writing on. Or over the Lindis, and they converge here. There is a small ferry, this was called Sandy Point, cross there, and then, see, this is safe. You can go this way, and it's actually slightly faster, but you run the risk of dying, which is bad, or losing your horse. I mean, these are precipitate hills. If you make a wrong step, it all ends really badly. Or you go over here, it takes longer, but you get there safely and alive. So they come, and no one was dumb enough to go up the Kawara Gorge. You did that, sorry, actually would end up, if you did that, you're simply putting yourself in all kinds of danger. There was mining going on up here, that definitely, but what they're doing is they're opting for safety. They go up, this is up on the road, there's now a road there up towards Wanaka, but they cross over and get into the entrance to Orao, basically traverse the whole length of it, cross over there where it's safe, walk on this side. So here, this is where there is now all the grapevines and everything, and then just here there was a ferry. Cross there and you're into Arrowtown, Queenstown, and then up here into your shot over Skippers, that rich sort of area. So Cardrona is nothing but just basically somewhere you go through, and but what happened is they stopped along the way, because every time the miners went anywhere, they tested the ground basically to see, and there was a group of 4 Australian veterans who stopped, and they found a chap Grogan for a while. This was called the Grogan Rush, which is not the best name, but anyway. They stopped and found gold in the loam, that's in the dirt, and they sort of thought, oh, someone must have dropped it, but it turns out that was the nature of the deposition there, but it wasn't good. There was about 1,000 miners came to here, spread out, but if you could stay there and get poor man's returns, or you could go to Arrowtown, Skippers, Shlotover, and get bucket loads of gold. Well, what are you going to do? The answer is exactly what people did. And so not a lot happened until the first deep lead reserves were found. Now, deep leads are river gravel deposits in depth. Now, if you think of gold in quartz, that goes through veins and everything, but deep leads are different. For one thing, they're really unstable. You're actually mining in gravel, so everything you do, you have to timber around what you're doing. But On the other hand, you don't have to set up a stamper battery to break everything up, which is what you have to do with quartz. If you get into it, it's theoretically dry, so you can... this was the big thing around Ballarat. So if you go, I've mentioned in other videos about getting to Sovereign Hill, that commemorates all the mining around Ballarat, which was in gravel. So they find this, and it's quite decent. It has a, they have a, so the warden announced a mile-long lead, 1.6 kilometres, 150 feet width. What's that? 50 metres width, at a depth of 40 feet. So that's what? Gosh, I've got to keep 14 metres. So, and they thought, it must have taken a bit of looking to find this, because you actually have to dig down hoping you're going to hit gold. But there were new syndicates formed. Syndicates is miners clubbing in together. You, instead of getting the standard small claim, you get 3 others and you form a large square. You can then apply for a water race and all that sort of thing, and you can get mining seriously. And so the settlement of Cardrona starts to develop. The town's about there, and they form it forms two basic. Oh, here we are, about the 150 feet. I didn't need to say that. But new businesses open, including that's Robert McDougall, who those of you in Christchurch, same guy for the Robert McDougall Gallery, and they open a number of businesses. This is James Lawrence, who ran a Cromwell bakery for a long time, and he opens a second branch there at Cardrona. So it's big at the time. Cardrona was the same size as Cromwell. John Hetherington, who was actually one of the first storekeepers to open at Cromwell, opens his store at Cardrona as well, and it forms into. And it basically, people are still going through there. So you've got 2 groups. You've got the local miners who keep you going. That's who, but you've got people journeying through to Arrowtown, Queenstown, up Shotover and that sort of thing. So they're stopping off and buying. So they're sort of getting 2 forms of business going through. The ones passing through and the ones staying. And it had 2 townships, upper and lower, and this was not it actually. This hotel built by Mr. and Mrs. Giacomo Lafranchi was actually the later one. They had an earlier version of that. I don't know why I haven't used that photo actually, but there was an earlier version. This one was the rebuilt one, I think from about 73. This one. So lower township, the miners had their cottages, and these were wooden cottages mainly, and because it's quite close to Wanaka, most of the building in central Otago was not out of wood because they don't have a lot of trees, but Cardrona has the benefit of just really being just up the road from Makarora, which is where all the native forests were. So instead of having to float it all down on the Wanaka, across Lake Wanaka, down the Clutha, wherever you need it, you could actually put it on the back of a dray and bring it on, well, or drag it behind a horse to get to here. Upper Township was the business, Lower Township was where the miners lived. Okay, so then we need to sort of just back off slightly and talk about George and Rebecca Bond. Now, George goes bust in Australia. A lot of the traders in Otago had already been traders of various forms in Australia, and many of them had come to a bad end. This is the only photo I can find that actually has George Bond in it, and you can see it's basically a dark blob. This is definitely Rebecca, his wife, but they come over, so basically they work their way out of the bankruptcy from Melbourne, and he works as a linen draper in Melbourne. He comes over here, and they build this. Now, this won't show up well on your film, I think, but it's a bridge that's very, very faint. It's the first bridge over the Shotover. And you've now got the Edith Cavell Bridge in the same spot. But this here they built, he and a hotel owner from Queenstown built this, and it's a toll bridge. So they built it, and basically you want to travel safely across the Shotover, you pay your toll. And it was big enough to take a small dray and horses over, or people on foot, and you just paid as you went. This is the old Bridge End Hotel, which I'm not sure if they built or bought. I'm leaning towards them buying it in place. So George gets really involved in the local mining community in the Shotover, organises mining syndicates, organises investments, organises all sorts of things. He's one of these people, he seems quite gregarious. But then in 1867, the news of the Cardrona's deep leads. Now remember, he's from Victoria, he knows deep leads. The news of the deep leads breaks, and they immediately put this business on the market, sell their share of the toll bridge, and shift to Cardrona. And basically Bond gets a claim, he organises a syndicate, and it's called the Empire Syndicate. And he sinks a shaft to 130 feet, that's what, 40 metres? Which is, figure that as a shaft, that's 40 metres is a long way down. And found a huge deposit, and the newspaper quote describes him, finding this gold is proof of the indomitable perseverance of Mr. Bond. And for 7 years, he and his syndicate mine the gold in depth and got really good returns. Now, in 1867, now I'm sorry guys, if you go to the website for the Cardrona Hotel now, they say they've been in business since 1863. If you visit their place, they say they've been in business since 1865. Both are wrong. Sorry Cardrona, I know you don't return my emails anymore since I've said this, but 1867, they build their hotel. Now, this is the Empire Hotel, so remember the name of the syndicate is the Empire, and he calls it the Empire Hotel. So, newly erected, it's one of the best and most comfortable family hotels in the district. Every hotel has something. We're the biggest, we're the best, we've got the biggest billiard table, we've got the best food, we've got the best stabling, something. But in this case, they say, we're just the best and most comfortable. Liquors are the best brands, elegantly furnished, bedrooms, double and single, first class table kept, so it was a restaurant as well. Good stabling, good feed. Now, that's important. And there's not a lot of natural feed for horses, so if you can organise to purchase hay or straw in for the horses, you can persuade people, oh, your horses are tired, stay an extra night, and more revenue. And you can actually hire a horse if you want while you're there. So they build this. Now this is named the Cardrona. It wasn't that name under him. It was the Empire. I have yet to find a picture of the Empire. This becomes the hub of every single political meeting, every single social meeting, dances, the whole 9 yards in the area. So they... this is the Cardrona Valley's largest hotel by quite a long way. Now it's built as a solid false front structure. False front simply means what you're seeing there is actually not the structure at the back. It's actually got a sloped roof there. Now it had a smaller wood-framed ironclad building behind it. And it was actually similar to many others in the region, including this one. If you look at that, look at these two. So you got the Cardrona, and then look at this one. This is at Macetown, and this here is built by Mr. and Mrs. Giacomo LaFranchi, who will end up being the neighbours of the Cardrona in the Cardrona Valley. But anyway, they built this. These are the only two photos from the Ron Murray collection that I've been able to find of the Macetown Hotel. But so what we've got here, that's looking at one way, looking at the other. I've made a note, I think, in one of my other presentations, that how you spot a hotel is they have to have a light out the front. So if you're looking at these, is that a hotel? Is that a hotel? Is that a hotel? Well, the answer is no. If it doesn't have a light in the front, it's not a hotel. Very simple rule. Although you got to sort of look and think, that must be dangerous, because you think you've got a whale oil or tallow candle or something attached to a wooden structure, because these were always wooden, always. You see stone hotels, they were always much later. The wooden ones, that's what they started off with. So I always think that they're basically building in their own vulnerability there. But so we know that at least one twin exists, and that's the main example that matches them, built at the same time, so possibly by the same builder. Who built it? No idea. We know who the main builders were in the area. They were building bridges, they were building hotels, but who built this one? Don't know. But the problem is, deep lead mining is, first of all, it's really dangerous. Secondly, it's fickle and you can lose the lead, which means you're burrowing along. You've got gold, 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 suddenly gravel. Does the lead go down, up, sideways? And you can spend a lot of time, let's say you gamble on it going down and you dig your tunnel down and find nothing. It's kind of like, okay, let's go back and let's dig up and let's, none there, let's go. And you can actually spend a lot of money trying to find it again. The other problem with deep lead mining is encroachment of water is the deadly enemy. If you have water seeping in, you have to spend a lot of money building pumping systems. Water powered, but they were still, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but you build a water pump up the top to raise the water from down below. And some of these things could be quite hazardous and quite expensive. Now both of those happened. They lost the lead and they had encroachment of water. And one journalist actually comments, this is probably the same guy that said he was doing really well, the previous one, Mr. Bond speculated largely at the Cardrona, but latterly things have not been altogether satisfactory. There was another one that was a bit more telling that said, lately he appears to have given way to inebriation. And so the mining losses and the drinking basically prompted the attempted sale of the shares and hotel in 1876. So he's been there since 67 when he built it, 1876. And so this is the advert. Now you'll see here Mr. Bond, who's retiring from the business. Well, you always say things like that. You don't say, I'm about to get chased out, so I'm selling it quick. And you'll see here what he's got. He's got 10 rooms, stabling, bathhouse, pump, 4-acre paddock, which is under crop. They grew potatoes. Sold potatoes all over the area. Household furniture, harmonium, good for a sing-along, billiard table, and wines. There's a full fruit garden. When you look at my presentation on cottages, we'll talk more about the gardens because they were quite important. And some dairy cattle. It's present insured for £500. The implication is there, probably spend about that to buy it. And it is to persons of moderate capital seeking a lucrative business in a prosperous district. I mean, what could go wrong? And you could buy it. Now the Bond's luck went from bad to absolutely appalling when February 1876 George goes to the Cromwell Hospital and self-admits for drunkenness. But then 3 days later, against medical advice, lets himself out, goes to a Cromwell hotel, owned by George Wellington Goodyear. Now, the Cromwell Junction Hotel, owned by Goodyear, backs onto the Clutha, and there was actually several deaths from people heading out to the loo, which was basically a long drop over the river, and missing their step and falling into the Clutha. Well, he's basically in a state of what's called delirium tremens. He is really, really not just, he's not drunk, but he's suffering from withdrawal. He's obviously quite a serious drunk. And he puts on his coat and his boots and climbs out the window. There's a guy in the room with him, tries to hold on to him, tries to stop him, but he ends up out. And they find his body down further down the river the next day. I know, it might have been 2 days later. There's an inquiry basically that concludes that he was drunk or suffering the effects of not being drunk, which for a serious drunk is about the same thing. They left 172 pounds, which is not much, and he's left a swarm of kids. They even have managed to have twins. That basically they tried to, now Mrs. Bond tries to sell the hotel. No one buys it, and so for 2 years she puts a manager in there. Again, no takers, and basically, despite the fact that it's the only hotel in the Upper Township, the La Franchise Hotel is still going. They basically, one of the problems was that at the same time as she's trying to sell, the whole Cardrona Valley mining is wiped out by a massive flood. Now, what the flood did was wash gravel into all of the shafts and all of the mines, so that instead of working on an open pit and getting into your gold, you've got to start again. You know where the gold is because you're onto it, hopefully, but you have to sink a new shaft, and all the timbering's gone, all your water race head has been washed away, all your tools have gone, and so basically the town more or less stops, and she just ends up locking the door and walking away, and she heads to the Ballarat Hotel, and this is the Ballarat in Arrowtown, and then she goes from there to the Mountaineer. Now, the interesting thing about the Mountaineer is that building is still there. The Mountaineer is a hotel that she took over as manager rather than owner or licensee, but it was renovated especially for her to take over. And if you have a look at the chapter about women hotel keeping in Rushing for Gold, the book that I co-edited with Lyndon Fraser, Sandra Quick writes about the fact that at one point in Queenstown all 5 hotels were run by women, and Rebecca Bond was one of them. She ends up going down to Invercargill, where she eventually passes away in about 1903. Lived a pretty good life. Now, if we go back to the Cardrona though, so the doors are shut. They form a mining association, and basically what you do with a mining association, you form it, you outline a prospecting plan, and you go to the local provincial council and say, hey, we want to do this, please give us a subsidy. It's kind of like a work for the dole plan. And the local government, the Lakes District Council, comes up with the money, and a small population is able to be sustained on that basis. So they've got a school that's thriving, those school buildings are still there. They've got Robert McDougall's store, La Franchise All Nations Hotel, and they're all going through to the mid-1880s. But what about the other businesses? So that's in the lower township. The upper township, this is actually a photo of everything falling down, basically. The stores and banks from the 60s sat empty, and so this is a quote: The departed glory of this once flourishing mining centre is now dismally demonstrated by the wreck of deserted public houses, stores and other buildings now inhabited by rats and presenting a most melancholy sight of decay. By contrast, the same commenter notes that in the lower township the cottages all look neat, freshly painted and have well kept gardens. Now, what changes things though is a road. So instead of this being just a track or a dray track or a bridle track, which is more or less what it was, you can now call it a road between Arrowtown and Wanaka via the Cardrona. So you're talking about going over the Crown Range, you know, the highest surveyed road in New Zealand. So that's built then in 1884, and what it means is that now you're back to Cardrona being something, so you've got the local population, but you've also got people passing through. And so 1888, the Prospecting Association finds gold, and they actually find really good gold. There's 41 acre leases taken out. By then the lease size has considerably increased. And the LaFranchis, this is LaFranchis, they actually sell their hotel and they work a claim over 20 years. They also built the first dredge on the Cardrona. They're quite innovative people. Italians, they still have descendants around the area. But at long last, so Rebecca Bond has left this hotel sitting derelict for 10 years, but there's all of a sudden new miners, new business, new road, and her hotel gets some interest, and John Willoughby agrees to buy it. 1889 he buys it, and he changes the name, and this is the first time the Cardrona, and that's got Willoughby on the name there, the empire becomes the Cardrona. And John runs a store that's built over to here, and Isabella keeps house. So he's still working as a miner, working with the mining association there, and they keep going. Now, what was interesting, that they just were about to purchase the All Nations Hotel as well, then when it burnt down, which is bad planning. And so the Cardrona was the only hotel left functioning. Now in 1922, after 32 years of operation, John dies. And for 4 years Isabella runs it by herself, and so in 1926 Isabella sells the hotel to John Patterson. James Dunlop Patterson. So it starts a new era at the Cardrona. Now, he's born here. He is a local. He's born in Cardrona. He is the nephew of the Queenstown and Cardrona storekeeper, Robert McDougall. He grew up in Cardrona. He was a local cricketing legend. He went with the Otago section to the Boer War, where he returned in 1901. He married Etty LaFranchi, so that's most of these. Oh, sorry, I didn't tell you. Isabella was a LaFranchi. So Isabella LaFranchi, then Etty LaFranchi. So the LaFranchis kind of provide the wives for the district. So James, that's James and Etty there. They're running the. He works a gold claim until 1926, and he gives up most of his mining to. Although there's a myth that he took his gold and buried it under the hotel, and so all of his gold's there to be found. Don't bother digging it up. I don't believe it. But anyway, he to basically run the hotel with most of his time. He still does some mining. Eddie dies after 10 years, and she dies in 1936. She's aged 61. So by the sounds of it, she was a little bit older than him. And so James starts running this on his own, and 20 years later, this fella, James McNeish, discovers him and puts the story of the Cardrona in the book Tavern in the Town. Now, this was a huge, huge publishing success in New Zealand. I actually was in email contact with James McNeish not long before he died, actually. He was quite chuffed to hear that I was sort of taking his work on researching the Cardrona and expanding on it. Very generous man, very encouraging. But he's a young writer, and this is his first book, and it absolutely captures the New Zealand imagination. The book in particular, when it talks about all these eccentric, strange sort of hotel owners and hoteliers. And basically it introduces Patterson to New Zealand. His book had 4 reprints. 1984 there was an expanded edition where, interestingly enough, the chapter that everyone liked the most shifted from about chapter 7 through to chapter 1, which was smart marketing, I think. And it was sort of, this book tapped into stories of out-of-the-way places. So this is a picture of the European Hotel over in Charleston on the west coast. It sort of tells a New Zealand that used to be and that people could have nostalgia for. So this was sort of a constructed heritage, a constructed idea. And he introduced this lonely, eccentric hotelier, James Patterson, on the dusty Cardrona road to New Zealand. And his eccentricity sort of strikes a chord with people. Like he would have these rules. If you were heading for Wanaka, this is on the road between Wanaka and Arrowtown, right? So if you're heading for Wanaka, where the road's relatively straight, you're allowed 2 beers. If you're heading over the Crown Range to Arrowtown, you can only have 1 beer. If you're a woman, you can't have any beers. Which is... every year he would head off to the races in Christchurch, and he just put a sign up on the door saying, "Beer under the counter, help yourself." And interestingly enough, there was an open box that people would just put the money in, and the box was always there when he got back. And from what I understand, it wasn't stolen. Like, can you imagine doing that now? Not really. But anyway, in 1950, whoa, what happened? 1951, okay, sorry about that. 1951, the Licensing Commission is determined to get rid of a number of licenses, and they basically do a license hunt through the country. They're looking for little hotels that don't do much, that can't justify being left as a licensed premises. And they decided the Cardrona was one of the ones in their sights. And so they said that this is to be cancelled. There's no need for it. It's not to be transferred. And the first report basically said you've had no one to stay. You've got no indoor toilets. It was still long drops. You have served no meals. You've kept no records, and we don't see why you should keep it. Well, it just about killed him. And so basically the whole Cardrona population turns up to the Licensing Commission meeting and said, don't. And the Licensing Commission backs down. And they write this report. The license is not to be transferred. It's been in the ownership of the present licensee for 32 years. He's almost 90. The Commission won't disturb him. Good, I like that. They try again in 1958, and again, basically, the locals turn up and they point out that we're quite good at shooting rabbits, we can shoot you. I've heard that from several different sources. I can't really believe that that was actually threatened, but 1984, in the new edition of Tavern in the Town, the illustrated one, McNeish records the death of James Patterson, and the eventual sale. So it sits there for another 10 years. And you can see in this photo where there's a Land Rover just pulled up, it is really, really starting to sag. The facade, which is the key part of the heritage, you can see that's not a trick of the projector there, that's actually as wavy as it looks. So they come in, they basically brace the whole facade, put in concrete foundations, add a timber floor above it. That's why I say there's no point in digging looking for gold. They would have found it if they had. But they spent, the Joneses, Edmund and Rosemary Jones, basically spend quite a lot of money effectively stopping it falling down. So 1975, so it had sat empty pretty much for 10 years when they took over. Then and it sort of limps along. You know, it's the Crown Range Road used to be so bad you couldn't get insurance if you had a rental car driving over it. They basically said, no, it's too rough, you can't take your car there. I mean, now it can still be pretty bad, but they no longer have that prohibition, obviously. But there was not a lot of traffic going through, and it limped along as a business. But but then it sort of found, it was either found by the marketers or it found the marketers, one or the other. But Saatchi and Saatchi were asked to revive Speight's beer. Now, Speight's used to be told, and I remember this when I was a university student in the 80s, it used to be drink Speight's, lose your mates. And that's not the case anymore, don't sue me. But they were basically tasked, Saatchi and Saatchi were tasked with defining a Southern man. And they created the Southern Man campaign with these laconic Southern men talking to each other in the Otago landscape. They're all riding horses. They've got the dries of bone. They've got the hats, and basically they come up with this tagline: "Good on you, mate." And it's a huge success. I mean, Speight's #1 beer brand in New Zealand now, and then but part of this campaign, they needed a hotel, and so they actually turned to the Cardrona Hotel, customer parking only, and so you can see the outline of the drinkers in the hotel, and they've parked their flock of sheep outside. So basically what they're using is they looked for what is an icon of Southern man beer drinking, and they found the Cardrona. So I would suggest that they created the Cardrona as that. Early 2000, let's fast forward slightly, early 2000s, the Three Bald Men Design Company, by the way, you guys never returned any emails, so thanks guys, were asked to create Speight's Ale House restaurants throughout the country. They had to incorporate the essence of the Southern man image and its, quote, its admired culture and heritage. I would have liked you to reply to your emails. In the architecture, 2002, the owner of the Cardrona Hotel goes through a whole bunch of owners. The current owner in 2002 owns the Cardrona in Otago, and he builds that, the Cardrona Speight's Ale House in Mount Eden. That's in Auckland. It's kind of like, yeah. Okay, so literally, this is look. There, Cardrona Valley, there, Mount Eden. Because Mount Eden and Cardrona Valley are so alike. Anyway, so they create this, and it's a full twin to its Otago namesake. Then it goes further. It does. 2007, there's a former Dannyvirk farmer, Tom Ellingham, writes to Speight's and says, hey, look, we've got no Speight's beer in England. This is the downfall of civilization as we know it. We need Speight's beer here. And so they come up with a promotion called the Speight's Great Beer Delivery. So they build a Speight's ale house to look like the Cardrona, and they stick it on, so there's going past the Statue of Liberty with the hotel on there. There's the there's the ale house, and this becomes an internet sensation. Like, even just picking the guys who are going to go on it becomes part of their marketing, and then they show that, I mean, these photos are classic. They show the ale house going past these and going through the, I mean, this costs a lot of money. You want to get that drawbridge raised, you have to pay. But of course, they do it. Why? Because what says London more than going past Tower Bridge? So, so what they've done is the Cardrona Hotel doesn't just become the New Zealand, it becomes the New Zealand hotel, not just a. So it's sort of, this Goldfields Hotel becomes iconic. And under the current owners, I mean, it's now become a wedding venue. This is straight off their website. And they have this car. There was one owner who revived the fact that there was one sheriff licence remaining, and he found it blank, so he filled in his own name and he drove around in a car in it and called himself the sheriff and that. Again, you should reply to your emails. But it's now, according to the New Zealand Historic Places Trust, or Heritage New Zealand, it is the most photographed hotel in New Zealand. So they had to create a special parking spot across the road so that, I mean, that's my photo, so that everyone could stop and get their photo, even if they're not going in for a drink. But it's worth going in for a drink. They have good food too. But so it started off built by George and Rebecca Bond, and it's gone through all these things, and now, but what is classic is that facade, that false, another word for it's called false front architecture. And it's actually, if you look in, if you read my article about it, which you can find on ResearchGate, false front architecture is claimed to be sort of the quintessential frontier architecture, where you've got the wooden facade, different building behind it. But that's the Cardrona, and there it is again when, this is when John Willoughby was owning it. So, oh, you can see the store that's mentioned a couple of times there. That's the Cardrona, okay?